Hi everybody, this is Mr. Wallace and I am going to describe to you how to set up the telescope, and then when you come for your orientation class, if you have any questions about it, I can take care of them at that point. This is called a Dobsonian telescope. It's basically a long tube that has a couple of mirrors in it, and there are positives and negatives about this kind of telescope. For one, it does not have a computer in it. There's nothing to hook up, there's no power. That's a real positive. It's very simple to use, even though it looks kind of large and intimidating. It's very easy to use, not having to plug it in or anything. The downside to that is, once you get something in your viewpoint, once you get something in your eyepiece that you want to look at and mess with the focusing for a little bit, one thing that you have to do is move the telescope. We're here on planet Earth. Planet Earth is moving and rotating, and we have to counteract that rotation. So you'll find that once you get it zoomed in on whatever you're looking at, the more power in the eyepiece that you have, the more you're going to have to make adjustments to the telescope. You'll have to move it in one direction, left or right, and then you'll also have to move it up or down depending on where you're looking. So you make those small adjustments to get it back in there, because there's no computer that's going to do it for you. But this is called a Dobsonian telescope. It is a Newtonian reflector, mirror in the bottom, mirror in the secondary mirror up here, and then your eyepiece goes here. What you really need to be focused on is this part right here. This is where the eyepieces go in. This is where you look through the telescope to see the object that you're trying to find. But there's a lot of parts to setting it up, and so I want to go through all of those parts and make sure that you're comfortable with how they work and how they go together. And again, if you have any questions, we can take care of those during our meeting, but you can also look on the information sheet that you will get and contact me through email or my cell phone. So the first thing you'll need to do is take out this plug. Some of them have a plug that looks like this. I don't know, can you zoom in a little bit so you can see that? We're going to take that plug out, and some of the plugs might look like this, and you might need to loosen this set screw right here. So it'll probably one of those two that it will look like, but take it out. And this is where the eyepieces go in. Now this is set up right now for the smaller eyepiece. It's 1 1/4 inches, but if you take this piece out, we can get the larger 2-inch eyepiece in there. And the way that you do that is you loosen this second knob right here, and oh, there's two of them. 2 knobs here, and this whole piece slides out. So these 2 knobs around this ring loosen this so this can come out. So this adapter, when it goes in, will allow us to accept a smaller diameter eyepiece. So when you want to use the larger one, you take this out, put the larger eyepiece in, tighten down the screws, and then you're good to go. So we'll start with this smaller one. So I'm going to put this back in. I'm going to tighten these down. And I also want to mention before I put an eyepiece in there that these knobs right here are the coarse focusing knobs. This is the fine focusing knob right here, and as you can see when I turn this, the bigger ones turn, but this allows you to really fine tune your focus for a person's eyesight. This is sort of a larger focusing knob that moves the eyepiece in and out a lot faster with a lot more range. And then it allows you to sort of get it close to being in focus, and then you use the fine focuser to make your adjustments. Now, if your telescope is not, when you move these knobs, if this is not going up and down, then these 2 knobs right here, or these 2 set screws, are kind of important. This one, this first one, needs to be tight, and this one needs to be loose. Because if we tighten this one down, it doesn't move anywhere. So we have to make sure this second one is loosened up a little bit and this one remains tight, and then that allows for focusing. So if you get confused and it's not working, check these knobs, and that's probably the case. If they're both loose, it sort of works, but it doesn't really do what it's supposed to do. kind of wish they weren't even in there, because it seems like it gets confusing a little bit. But this one's got to be loose, this one tight, and then that will allow focusing. All right, so let's go ahead and put our first eyepiece in there. And before we do that, let's go ahead and focus on what's inside this case. Well, so this is the accessory case that comes with the telescope when you check it out, and all the parts that you need to set the eyepieces in and the finder scope, everything is inside of here. One of the pieces of paper will be an inventory sheet, sort of a, if I can grab it here, a picture of what it's supposed to look like. So when you get ready to bring it back to school, make sure all the parts are in here, and this picture will help guide you as to what parts do belong in there. And so let's kind of quickly go through the parts. There is a flashlight right here, and it's painted red. It won't take away your night vision very quickly, and so you can use this when you're outside observing. This canister right here holds an eyepiece that we'll talk about right away, so I'm going to leave this in that orientation there for a sec. This is a 2-inch eyepiece, and it goes in the larger hole. I'll leave that like that for now as well. This is called a doubler, and if you get to a point where you're feeling very comfortable with the telescope, you can bump the power up twofold by adding this before you put the eyepiece in. And this fits in just like a normal eyepiece, and then your eyepiece goes in here, and inside there's a mirror that doubles the power. So that's right here. There is one single eyepiece right here that's probably not going to be that much important for you. It is a 9mm eyepiece. The smaller the number, the more power there is. And if you can look here, this hole in this eyepiece is very small. It's a very difficult eyepiece to use. I'll recommend using these two much more than pulling this one out, but that's what this is right here. There's also a cell phone holder. The cell phone holder lets you attach your cell phone to the telescope itself. The directions are right here. You can go ahead and you can try it, but I would also say that just holding your cell phone up to the eyepiece is usually good enough. You can hold it there and you can take a video or a snapshot, and it turns out pretty good. So depending on using one of these two eyepieces, I don't know that you would need the cell phone adapter. There is a battery pack here. You don't need to worry about that. That has to do with cooling down the mirror, but we'll talk about that in a minute. And then the last thing is the finder scope. This is the scope that allows you to see a wide angle of the sky and get something somewhat close in your viewpoint. So we'll talk about how to set that up in just a minute, but it goes in here. There are two caps, one on each end. Hopefully they still are in your box, and it goes back in here when you're done. There is a moon filter inside this little plastic box. The moon filter allows you to look at a moon that's really bright. It sort of blocks out some of the light, because if you're going to look at a moon that's half illuminated or more, like a waxing gibbous up to a full moon, it's going to be too bright for your eye. And so I'll show you how to add this to the eyepiece depending on what your checkout date is and the phase that the moon is in. You will also find information in here. I'll usually include a star chart or two, and usually I'll go ahead and print something from an astronomy magazine on what is visible during the month or the 2 weeks that you have the telescope for checkout. So that's all in there. It all fits in there really nicely, and hopefully you can get it back without anything missing. Some of the main parts of the telescope: we have the optical tube. That's basically a metal tube. It has a mirror at the end. These have been adjusted before your checkout date, so please don't touch any of these knobs or this wire here. That's pretty much off limits. If it gets out of alignment, then you'll have a hard time finding anything in the scope, so don't touch any of those. These two knobs right here allow you to tighten down the tube so it doesn't flop all over the place. And once you get something that you're looking at in the eyepiece, you want to try to tighten those down a little bit so it doesn't move around and get out of your viewpoint. So tighten those down when you've got something that you want to see and keep it in there. The other knob, which is, I don't know if you can see it or not, is right down here. That allows for the telescope to rotate on this base, and if you tighten this down, it allows it to move less. And so you want to find the right kind of tension so that it's not moving with wind or somebody slightly bumping it, but you don't want it to be super tight because you want to be able to move the tube around a little bit and have some flexibility there. Okay. Some of them still have this piece on it, which is to hold eyepieces, except I found that keeping this case nearby is maybe just as important. Then you won't lose caps, you won't lose any of these caps that go on them. If you want to use that, it's optional, it's not a big deal. Just keep track of all the caps. It does have a handle here. So when you are getting to your car, when you take this out of the school and going to the car, you want to loosen these knobs right here. This lifts out. The case that this fits into can just go on the ground next to your car. Take this out, put it in the case, zip up the case. It's got handles on it. It can go right in your car. Just keep it from flopping around or rolling around in your car so that it doesn't get damaged at all. Okay. Let me go ahead and take the cap off. This cap you'll want to keep on most of the time, but I will show you the inside here. The primary mirror is down in the bottom, and then there's a secondary mirror here. But again, this has all been adjusted for you. You don't need to touch anything inside. Don't put anything in here. Don't allow this to be sitting outside in any kind of snow or any kind of elements that could actually go in there. Keep the cap on at all times until you are ready to actually look at the object you're targeting. Okay, so you'll also notice that the telescope is in this rolling cart. There are 4 wheels that all have swivel ability, and they all can lock down and lock this into place. Now this is really nice for a couple of reasons. There's the unlock. This rolls very nicely out to your car when you're leaving school and back into school. You can put it right back in the base and roll it in instead of carrying it. It makes it a lot easier. You can also use it for being outside and observing. One of the things that you want to make sure is that the telescope is cooled down to the outside temperature. And so if you want to set the scope, once you get home, put the scope into the base. And if you have a garage that's not heated, that's probably the best case scenario where you can let it cool down to the outside temperature, but yet keep it in the base, so when you're ready, you can roll this outside, and if it's clear on a night, you can get out there and easily just roll it outside. So these bases are pretty handy. They are numbered. The number on the base should match the number on your case for accessories, and that's for more record keeping than anything, but they are numbered. Now, I think I've covered all of the sort of the main parts. Let's get down to actually setting up the scope for making some observations. Okay. The first thing that I'd like you to do is to take out the eyepiece that's inside this little canister. And you'll notice that it has kind of a translucent cap on this end, and it has a rubber cap on this end. This is a nice eyepiece for a couple of reasons. And I'm going to put these caps back in the canister so I don't lose those. Set this aside. This is a zoom eyepiece. It will go all the way down to 8 millimeters. The smaller the number, the higher the power, and it goes all the way up to 24. And so it's like a zoom lens on a camera, and it works very well. It's a really good eyepiece. It's got a nice big eye relief here and a rubber gasket here to go against your face if you get that close. But the larger the glass, the easier it is to use. So this is really nice because Once you put it in here, you can leave it on 24, which gives you more of a wider field of view. And then when you dial it down to 8, that zooms in on the object and allows you to see more detail. Okay, so we have the telescope set up. I pulled the plug out of here. I'm going to take this eyepiece and put it right in that first ring, and I'm going to tighten down this first set screw. Now this will not pull out if you do it correctly. These two, remember, are the two that tighten down this ring itself, but this one tightens down the eyepiece. And so once you get it in there, you can work it back and forth. You can make sure that everything's operational there, and you're all set to go. Make sure that your focuser will move if you are moving these large knobs, and then you're all set and ready to go. So we're missing something though. We're missing the finder scope. And this is a really important thing to get set up correctly. So now I'm going to show you how to make that happen. So I'm going to grab this out of the accessories case. I'm going to remove the caps off of both ends. And this is going to slide in from the back. It won't slide in from the front, so you can't mess this up. But it'll slide in from the back and into this bracket, and then you have to, can you see this knob right here? You need to tighten this down nice and tight, this knob right here, nice and tight, so that it doesn't slide out. This is pretty heavy, and if it falls out, it's probably going to break. So make sure you get this one tightened down so it's not going to fall out. Now there's 2 set screws on this finder scope itself, and if you look, when I turn this one, you can see the finder scope going, kind of go from the side here. You can see it going back and forth this way. This one right here, now come from this side, goes up and down. You can see that movement happening. So left and right, up and down. This one right here is actually a spring, and that keeps tension on this as these two are moving. You don't need to mess with this at all, just these two. Okay, so now, how do we get what we're looking at in this scope into this scope? It's not that hard, but what we want to do is start with this eyepiece first. So I want to zoom it all the way out to 24, its longest, its widest field. And what I want to do is make sure my cap is off here. Aim it at something that is nearby. So for instance, if you are near a cell phone tower or some kind of tower off in the distance or a tall tree, find something that you can locate by looking and moving the telescope to find that object. You probably will need to move the focus all the way out, and as soon as you find that, you want to try to get it exactly in the middle of your viewing. And what you'll notice to begin with is that the object is upside down. So if you're looking at a faraway telescope or a cell phone tower, it's going to appear upside down in this eyepiece, but that's okay. It's not going to move. Tighten down your knobs here a little bit so that the telescope doesn't move around. And once you get it right in the middle, don't touch it, okay? Now, the next thing that you want to do is go back to your finder scope and either move this left or right or up and down and get it right in the crosshairs. Because if you set this up correctly and get these two in sync, now when you go to find a planet in the sky, you use the finder scope first, get that, move the telescope around and get it right in the crosshairs. Now when you go back to this eyepiece, it should be there. And so, but you have to go through that setup process first. You have to make sure that you find an object on Earth and find it in this one first, adjust your finder scope second. Now when you look at something in the sky, you reverse that. You go finder scope first and then to your eyepiece second. Let's go through the process of going to the larger 2-inch eyepiece. It's pretty easy. We can just take this eyepiece out, set that aside. loosen those 2 set screws, pull this adapter out, and grab this larger 2-inch eyepiece that can go right in this hole, and then tighten down the set screws. The reason this is nice, and now this is a 30 millimeter, so it doesn't have as high a power as the lowest setting on this does. So this is lower power, but the nice thing about this is it gives you a nice wide field of view. So you can look at something like the Andromeda Galaxy or a nebula, and you can see the whole thing in here. Plus, the glass on this is really big, and it's really super easy to use for younger kids. It doesn't take as much skill and trial to get your eye focused on what you're looking at. One of the things that you might have a problem with is getting this focused. I was using this to look at Jupiter not too long ago, and I couldn't quite get it in focus. I had it all the way out and it wasn't in focus. So that means I need to move it further. Well, I can't move it any further. But if you loosen these 2 knobs, this can actually slide way out here, and I can tighten up those set screws, and that gives me another inch of focus. And then at that point, I was easily able to see the object. So you might need to do that for this 2-inch eyepiece. Okay. So depending on when your checkout time is for the telescope, the moon might be in the sky early in the evening. It might be in the sky late in the evening, not coming up until really late at night, or it might not be up at all. The other thing you can do is look at the moon during the daytime if you happen to have a checkout time where the moon is in the sky during the day instead of at nighttime. So that all kind of depends on when your checkout time is. You want to make sure you never ever point any of this toward the sun, not even the finder scope. You will burn your eye instantly, probably damage telescope parts as well. But the main thing is you can really hurt yourself if you come anywhere close to the sun. So if you're trying to look at the moon during the day, make sure that it's far enough away from the sun that you don't make that mistake. If you're going to look at the moon during the night and it's really bright, like a crescent moon, you don't need to worry about this. But if you're going to look at a moon that is illuminated half or more, a quarter and waxing gibbous, you're going to want to use the moon filter. Now the moon filter is really super easy to use. Take it out of its case right here, and it literally just screws on to the bottom of the eyepiece. Now it doesn't go in all the way, so don't force it in, just enough to get it nice and snug, and then the eyepiece can go right back into the telescope. Okay, and you're all set. So what it does is it basically cuts down some of the bright light coming from the moon. And you'll want to do that because it's just too bright on your eye. It will really ruin your night vision. So that's how you use the moon filter. Okay, so your check back in date most likely is 2 weeks after your checkout date. I think we might have to move to a 1-week checkout, but for now it's still 2 weeks. And so make sure that you bring it back on that date, and you need to bring it to school here in the morning prior to school starting. I need to get them back in this room so that I can adjust the mirrors and make sure that everything is all set and ready to go for the checkout that will happen later that day to a whole new group of kids. So please make sure that you get it back on time. The other thing is make sure that you get all the parts back the way they should be. And that would be, first of all, you want to make sure that you remember this is really heavy, so don't be turning this screw unless you've got a hold of it. Take this out. There are 2 caps for this, hopefully. I know some of them are already missing on some of the scopes, but if you have the caps, make sure those are back on, and you can bring it in a little closer here. Make sure this gets carefully put back down into its spot. And this is that zoom eyepiece. This is the one that goes in the canister. Make sure it goes in like this so this translucent part is up. Otherwise this cap will not fit on it. So get that back in there. This one goes right there. This big 2-inch eyepiece hopefully has 2 end caps on it as well. Here's the moon filter, slips right in there like that. All of the other things, including your star charts, make sure those are in there. And this is the plug for the eyepiece hole, so I'm going to close this off, and then we'll go back here. Make sure this gets back in, and if you want, you can tighten this down a little bit so that this doesn't come out. I think that's probably how we lost a couple. They didn't tighten this down and then somehow they got lost. So tighten that down a little bit and make sure the cap for the end is nice and secure. And you're ready to pack it up and bring it back to school. Again, loosen these big knobs, take this out, put it back into the blue carrying case, into your vehicle, as well as these two bases, the black one and then the rolling one back in your car. When you get back to school, reassemble it, at least put the main optical tube back in the base. Base goes in the rolling cart, and I found that pulling this like a dog on a leash works pretty well. So if you put the case around the scope, it doesn't seem to pull very well because I don't have these knobs tight, so I'm going to tighten those down. And when I do that, we can just pull it right along. Watch out for bumps. Try not to turn it over and bring it back in. And make sure that we get it back here before school. So there are some things that sort of some do's and don'ts about the telescope during the time that you have it. Please do not leave this out in the elements. It can be outside for an hour or two prior to you, if it's going to be clear and you're going to go out and look at the night sky, then you can take everything outside and let it sit outside, but keep this cap on at the end of the optical tube. Keep the cover sort of around it so that it doesn't get all dewy, the telescope itself. And then you can let it cool down with the air temperature. Again, that's a really important thing to make sure the telescope is the same temperature as the air. If you go from a warm house and you take it outside when it's cold, there will be some moisture that will condensate on the inside parts of the telescope, and then you won't be able to see anything. So you want to make sure that you take this out in plenty of time for that cool down to happen, and then any moisture that does condense has a chance to just leave and evaporate. And so the other thing is, don't leave this out for like during the daytime when the sun's beating down. You never know what can happen. So make sure that you just take care of it. You are responsible for any damages. That's all on the inventory sheet in your accessories case, and the costs are on there. One last year went out and somebody had left it out in the rain and the base got wet and it wrecked the base. And so this is a brand new base that I just got the other day to replace this. So please don't leave it out in any kind of impending weather. If it's going to rain, make sure that you don't leave it outside. What I would start with for viewing any parts of the night sky would be the planets. And they're the easiest to locate in the sky. They are sort of the brightest things to see, and they're a really good starting point. So if you want to catch Venus, you'll have to catch it pretty quickly after sunset most of the time, or if it happens to be around on the other side of the sun, you can catch it before sunrise. But there's not much time on either side of sunrise or sunset, depending on which side Venus is on during your checkout time. Right now, Jupiter and Saturn are visible in the sky, but again, it depends on when you're watching this. You'll have to look at a night sky chart, a current night sky chart, to find out exactly where those are. And that's something that I'll go over during the class time. And once you've been able to locate and focus in on the planets and maybe take a couple pictures or whatever, maybe you've looked at the moon as well. If the moon is visible, you should probably start there. It's the easiest thing to find, obviously. But after you've located planets and looked at those, then if you're still comfortable with going on, looking at some of those deep sky objects that I'll cover in the class, the Andromeda Galaxy, the Orion Nebula, and so forth. And those are all really cool things to look at, but you've got to get skilled at putting this thing together and getting it adjusted correctly and getting it ready to go. So I think that's about it. Main thing is you want to have fun. Get outside. Hopefully you have some clear nights during the time you have it checked out, and you can find a lot of things in the night sky because it's really cool. So good luck.